Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandy Burgoyne from the Smart Places team in New South Wales Government Department of Planning, Infrastructure and Environment. Welcome to the 6th Masterclass of 5G and Urban Landscape. It's going to be an absolutely tremendous session. Can I ask you all, while you're joining, please go to menti.com. You can see the website on the slide that you can see, and use code 82034559, and you'll see the interactive poll. This one is just asking you whereabouts you're from. So just go to menti.com and fill that in. I think we're going to open the poll shortly. So welcome to the 5G and Urban Landscapes Masterclass. I'm speaking from the Durrung Nation, and firstly and most importantly, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging. Now, before I introduce our wonderful panellists, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you could stay on mute and interact as much as possible in the chat. And I'm joined today by a stellar cast. I'll start with introducing Mike Wood, who's coming to us from Southport in Queensland. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Sandy. Great to be here live on 5G from Southport.
All right, welcome, Mike. Mike is the technology leader for EME standards at Telstra and is leading all things 5G thinking. So we'll hear from Mike shortly. And we have Matt Evans also in the Gold Coast. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Sandy, and welcome. Thank you.
Matt is a specialist consultant for the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association, and he's also a former mayor and councillor, which he was for 6 years at Monash City Council. So he brings dual perspectives. Thanks, Matt. And we have another Matt, who's going to confuse the facilitator, Matt Schultz. Hello, Matt. Where are you?
G'day, Sandy. I'm in today from regional Victoria, Bendigo.
Oh, welcome. Matt wears a number of hats. He's the director at Gravel Road Group. He's also the co-chair of the G20 Global Smart Cities Digital Infrastructure Task Force, and also chair of the 5G Committee at Standards Australia. So welcome, Matt. And Troy Daly. Welcome, Troy.
Hey, Sandy, I'm coming live. I think it's Santa Cruz in California.
It looks pretty enticing, Troy. Glad to have you here. So Troy's the Executive Director for Precincts at the Greater Sydney Commission here in New South Wales. Before we kick off with the format, I think Mark may have opened and possibly closed our poll now. Mark, would you like to share where are we from? So we have got people are coming in as we speak. We won't run late. We will move forward with the agenda, but we've got representation from the state government, from our industry partners, professional services and research and academic sector. So thank you, Mark. We'll keep an eye on that as we progress through the masterclass. So going back to our gallery view, today's format for those watching it's going to be an interactive session. We will have a presentation from our panellists, and we'll also then invite you to answer some questions via Menti and also put questions in the chat. So stay with us for the 2 hours. It's sure to be a great ride. So kicking off, we're actually going to beam live to Southport in the Gold Coast, where we have Mike Wood. So I'm going to hand to you, Mike. I feel like a news anchor right now. So, so over to you, Mike. What are you going to show us there?
Okay, thanks, Sandy. And look, I hope you can hear me okay. Literally, Matt's just up the road at one of the light rail stops, and we're going to cross to Matt in a minute. but we're live on 5G. It's interesting that, well, it's important that we're coming to you from Southport today, because this is where 5G was launched in Australia we were running trials back in 2018. And then in 2019, we launched the first commercial services. Now, we thought we'd do something a little bit different for the Masterclass today, because you're looking at innovation, you're looking at smart cities into the future. This is actually an innovation laboratory behind me. So the building you can see, the telephone exchange, and some of the things that we've equipped around Southport was an innovation lab we built in 2018. And it's really at the heart of what you might be able to do in your precincts going forward, where you want to innovate and develop, smart cities of the future. There's a couple of things I'll show you here, but basically we launched it in 2019, but we've been able to test all things 5G here. Now, we're in the heart of Southport, which is a smart precinct. There's a couple of things that I'm going to show that we're going to connect up to smart road networks. Now, if I look, and tell me if you can see this or you can't see this, Sandy, on the side of the building, you should be able to see, it looks like a security camera. It's actually a high definition camera. Can you see that on the side of the building, Sandy? I'll just let you know.
Yes. I can see a circular,
a circular black
and white
black camera. Yeah,
attached
that's the one.
to the side of the building.
It's attached to the side of the building, and if you look just above it, and I'll move the camera down, we've actually got some antennas blended into the architecture of the building, or blended into the side of the building. That's one of the key features of what we try and do in these sort of precincts, is locate antennas in existing infrastructure. But back to the camera, there's a number of security cameras that are connected to the, the Gold Coast City Council security system and for the light rail system. This one on the side of the building is connected up to some smart analytics where we're monitoring traffic on the road and people crossing the road. And when we go inside, you'll see the dashboard, but it detects jaywalking. And what it's going to be able to do in the future is connect up the basically the smart road grid. So we're going to be able to, this is an example of where cameras like this with the architecture and, object detection can send a warning or an alarm to vehicles when they're approaching if they're crossing at a red light. Now, that's just one aspect of how 5G with low latency and cloud computing in this area is going to help. If I move around,
I can see the green light over there. I think there's a smart pole behind that. Are you able to just point your camera?
I was just going to go over there. Can you see that now, Sandy?
Yes, I'm sure the audience can see that. It's quite a complex multi-function pole there.
So on the pole, which is a smart pole erected by the Gold Coast City Council, you've got the road monitoring system for the council on the roads. You've also got the council-operated Gold Coast Wi-Fi. They're the little antennas at the top, and that's what they've got those all around the Gold Coast as part of a smart grid of connected services. It's also a very residential area. So one of the things we were able to test is all of the connections, and we're going to show you some millimetre wave connections shortly. But we thought it was good to come to a precinct like this to make it a little bit more interactive. We're going to show you inside the lab and some of the things that are going on. But Matt, I think you're up at the tram stop, or you're up at the light rail. And Matt, we're going to cut to Matt Evans, and he's going to show you a connected rail or the potential for 5G into the future. So I'll hand over to you, Matt.
Oh, that was seamless. Hello, Matt. You're coming through loud and clear. Oh, actually, I've got no volume, Matt.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Sandy?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great. Look, welcome to everybody to the Southport Light Rail Station. The reason we wanted to bring you out here was to just illustrate the 5G environment. And I've got here a 5G small cell. This little thing is going to be a very typical 5G small cell. And behind me, we've got the Southport light rail stop. This is, as Mike was saying, this is a very vibrant location. There's a lot of foot traffic. There's a lot of people using mobile devices. And it's the perfect spot for where we would be looking to integrate this sort of small cell into the urban infrastructure. Now, there's a number of ways we could do that. And if you see behind me, there's a small camera there on a light pole. This could be co-located on the light pole, on on the pole there with the security camera. You've also got the rooftop of the light rail stop, and again, this could be integrated into there, or even it could be a concealed solution behind radio transparent sheathing. So really minimising the impact of this little thing here. I think that what's really important is that the industry work with councils and state governments to make sure that we integrate these into council and state government assets to minimise the impact on the streetscape. And we'll look forward to talking a bit more about that a little bit later in the masterclass. So, Sandy, thanks for joining me out here at the Southport Light Rail Stop.
Thank you so much, Matt. And there's what we're going to do, Matt, while you and Mike make your way into the presentation space, is we're going to open up a Menti poll, and the question that we're going to ask is, what 5G enabled solutions do you think will benefit the community? So just a little bit of a thought starter for those on the call. So Mike and Matt have certainly shown just you a small insight. They've pointed to that health precinct, which has a 5G enabled lab, and also some smart poles with cameras and object detection facilities, which goes into a dashboard, which can also then give alerts to drivers to prevent accidents. So there's a few. So I think, Mark, can I ask Mark Pollack? Here we go. We've got a couple of responses. So we've got e-health, better safety. And we might come back to this Menti poll at the end of the masterclass as well, just to see whether there's some more learnings. But it's great to see those two up there. Now, I'm just going to ask, look to Mike to see whether he is in position. It really does depend on how quickly they walk back into the presentation area. Okay, right on time. So, Mark, if you'd like to close the Menti, and Mike, can I ask you, did you walk past that dashboard that you were going to show us?
I'm just going to show you the dashboard. What I forgot to show you outside, which we might show you a bit later on, is directly across the road from that traffic light was, of course, the nursing and the medical college. So in the precinct here, you talked about e-health, and even though I had it in my notes, but there was a medical college directly opposite. But if you remember the camera, and it was looking at the people jaywalking or looking at the traffic and the lights, I'm going to show you the dashboard. Now, this was done a little bit earlier, but it'll just take me a minute to bring it onto the screen. And if I look at this, if I go across a little bit, you can see there are people crossing the road. You can see the object detection, the lights flashing. It's not flashing red yet. Now the light is red. So with the light flashing red, that can automatically send alert signals to the nearby traffic. So this is just replaying. So this is what the typical dashboard looked like with object detection. Now, I hope that came through, that you could see that, but that's really one of the key things, you know, in terms of interactivity that 5G is going to bring, particularly with those low latency applications. Now, Matt Evans is going to
actually
talk
now,
about,
Mike.
Sorry, yeah.
Because we've got might have a few lay people who are not familiar with 5G. So low latency. Just tell me what that means.
Yeah, sure. Low latency is the response time. So when you send a command on a computer or you're connecting on a network, it's like the ping time, the time it takes for the network to respond. It's not the download speeds that people go on about where they do speed tests. It's actually the network response time. And we'll show you some applications of that as we do our 5G interaction. So it's really, and the low latency, you need millisecond latency so that anything that happens instantly. If it's if the latency is too great, the alert that would go to the traffic would be too late potentially, and somebody may get injured. So
that's fantastic, and that's why it's so critical for autonomous vehicles in traffic. And great answer. And well, thank you for that wonderful demonstration in Southport. And are you handing over to Matt Evans now?
So I'll hand over to Matt Evans. Matt's going to come into shot and
Hello, Sandy.
Hello, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
Well, now I can see you wonderfully.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
There we go. Great, great.
And Matt, before you start, whereabouts are you?
Okay, so Sandy, we're inside the 5G, Telstra 5G Innovation Centre, and this is a fabulous place. If any of you get the chance to come up and take a look, it's fabulous. There's lots of amazing tests that get done to verify just how good 5G is and all of the benefits that it does deliver. So maybe you should get in touch with Mike and he can arrange a tour.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, great. Look, Sandy, we just wanted to kick off. I know that many of the people that have joined the masterclass will be familiar with some of the use cases relating to 5G, and certainly just being out in Southport, we've just seen the potential for 5G. But I just wanted to quickly run through what does 5G mean and how does it benefit society? Of course, smart cities is the focus of this masterclass and 5G, and very soon 5G will start to play a major part in the 5G ecosystem. It will become more critical as the latency is required for smart city applications. Also, schools and homes will also greatly benefit. We've all spent a lot of time at home due to COVID, so obviously that will be a huge part as well. Safer roads and transportation. Mike has just very clearly illustrated to us the benefits of that low latency in terms of safety for pedestrians and that interaction between cars and pedestrians. Remote healthcare. Again, that ability to be able to view and understand in real time the imaging and the diagnostics between doctors and nurses, and equally the connected ambulance scenario, which I think is fascinating, where imagine you're a patient in the back of an ambulance and the hospital can be connected to the ambulance to see exactly what's going on in real time, so that they're prepared for when the patient arrives at the hospital. Smart manufacturing industries and farms. Now, a really interesting fact that I find very fascinating is that we need to produce around about 70% more food by 2050 to be able to feed the world. And precision agriculture will play a huge part in that, as will 5G. Also with manufacturing, 5G and the ability to connect to hundreds of thousands of things within a square kilometre will mean that 5G will transform the factory floor and manufacturing. So they're just some of the benefits to society. We hope that you're able to get a feel for how 5G will interact with our lives from now until into the future. A look at the Southport precinct, I think, hopefully did bring that to life. So, Sandy, I'll now hand back to Mike, who's just going to tell us a little bit more about the mechanics of 5G and how it all works. So, thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.
okay, I hope this is a seamless transfer. You'll have to turn your mute off, Matt.
Yes, we can see you well. Where are you now, Mike?
So I'm just going to go over to the lectern again, I suppose. All right. Now, what I'm going to describe, and this is what we didn't show before when I was outside, this was where we were, and of course you saw those analytics. In terms of the medical facility and the training college, this is in fact one of the major medical training centres on the Gold Coast for medical practitioners and nurses. So that was the centre I was going to show you before, directly across from our innovation centre. But how does 5G actually work? And that's what we want to explore now, and then show you a couple of live demonstrations. At the moment, if you've got a 5G device, or if you've got a 5G phone or a device, it's actually working in what's called a non-standalone mode. So it's actually working in conjunction with 4G. When you make a connection, all the connection and the control signaling goes on the 4G layer, and that's because we get the coverage layer. And when you connect up with your data, so when you want to watch a movie, download a high-speed or download a video, or you're doing a speed test or any application, you're using the 5G data layer in conjunction with 4G. So that's how we can get the super fast response and the super fast speeds. And we were able to bring 5G to the community earlier. The standards were developed so that they could use both 4G and 5G. In later applications, in fact, later on this year, we will be switching to a standalone network. So 5G will be operating by itself, but we will still leverage the benefit of 4G as well. Now, in terms of the architecture, so you may or may not have seen this before, but basically a mobile data network has three components: the radio access network, and that's really the small cells, the mobile phone base stations, or the towers as people call them, the in-building solutions, and even your home connection form access to the radio, or form part of the radio access network. They connect up, they connect people to the core network, which is the mobile exchange and data network, and that manages all of our internet and data connection and our voice connections. Now, what 5G brings that's different is the ability to have cloud computing, or better integrate with cloud computing. And a key feature, like in traditional networks, you had a single network server. With 5G, what you've got is you've got cloud services and distributed services in local communities, or in smart agriculture, or in smart factories. Here in Southport would be a classic case where we can have a local server serving the Southport needs. Well, this is in fact illustrating potentially a farm, but an illustration over here might be like Southport. When you've got those local servers, and you asked me about latency before, Sandy, that means that the connection and the signal doesn't have to go all the way, in our case, back to Brisbane. It's only going to a server in Southport. So the connection and the response is very, very quick. What we can do with 5G networks, of course, is what's called network slicing. Now, that means we can have slices of the network dedicated to specific services. And we're going to show you how that will connect up shortly, and the extra spectrum that can allow for those dedicated services like, you know, emergency services, for example, and rural and agriculture and mining can have their own dedicated services. We talked about small cells before, and Matt found a small cell on the bench, and in fact, this is the one. I don't know if you can see this here. I'm not going to pick it up, that's the small cell that we had outside. They are literally the size of a shoebox. That's one of the new millimeter wave small cells. They have a fantastic advantage in that they're small, they're low powered, and they're designed for localized coverage. They have a range of, you know, tens to hundreds of meters, typically out to maybe 300 or 400 meters. But they are small and they do provide that localized coverage. And they're designed so that they complement the macro network. But with 5G, you'll see many more of these, but blended into the architecture. And obviously, it's going to fill in capacity. 5G and spectrum. Spectrum is the key to being able to connect all of the devices of the future. And if you're thinking about smart cities or smart precincts, where there's going to be thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices, you're going to need that spectrum to have those devices connected seamlessly and reliably. For 5G, there are three frequency bands used. There's the low band, which is the existing 3G technology, and 4G, and they typically work off the mobile phone towers. Then there is the mid band, which is what at 3.6 gigahertz. That's what 5G is mainly deployed at now, in the mid band, and that's for, we've got macro and small cells, so that's for localized coverage and capacity. And we've just had a spectrum auction, and Matt Evans is going to talk to you about spectrum later, but this is the high band, which has considerable millimeter wave or gigahertz frequency range spectrum. And that's going to really open up the capability of 5G to connect those billions of devices going forward. So that's an example of the spectrum that we're going to use for 5G. The other significant technology, and we'll demonstrate this in the lab very shortly, is the ability to have beamforming. Now, what that means in simple terms is that the old 3G and 4G networks, they sent a signal from the antenna in all directions, whether it was one user or millions of users or hundreds of thousands of users. It didn't matter how many users were connected. But with 5G, we can increase, well, we can certainly up that to make sure that with a millimetre wave base station or a millimetre wave small cell, we can have individual signals sent in small beams to the individual devices. Now, this is really going to revolutionise the way that devices are connected. When you've got a tailored connection to an individual device, it means that you're not sending signals to where you don't need them. There's less interference and you get a better quality connection. So if you think about designing smart precincts, and I know you're going into a future planning session on this, you might want to look at where millimetre wave or this beam steering ability for the technology can really benefit. It might not be fantastic. You might not be after very fast speeds because you're just after reliability of connection. And that's what these individual beams can do. So what we're going to do now is I'll grab the camera back. We're going to show you a couple of live demonstrations. Now I'll get Sammy, our young professional here. He's in Telstra. He's been fantastic and he's been helping us set up some of these demonstrations, but I'll just show you around the laboratory. We're going to do a couple of demos here of the spectrum and also of the antennas. Now, Matt Evans, you're over here. I think you can probably see Matt. Do you want to go and stand under the mid-band antenna?
We can see Matt and Mike, you're doing well. The chat's going wild. People are commenting how this is a game changer. So we'll come to some of their questions after you've done the demo, which we are eagerly waiting for. It's looking good from our end.
Well, can you still see Matt? Can you point to the...
Yes, we can see Matt.
The antenna above Matt's head, that's about the size of a kitchen cupboard under the sink. That's like a mid-band antenna. That connects 5G up to date. So that's what we're using for most of the networks today. And Matt, if you get your steps up and you move across to the rest of the lab, Sammy's helping set up some equipment. Now Matt's pointing to one of the small cells that's mounted up on the roof.
That's the shoebox size
little shoebox. We'll call it the shoebox, the small cell shoebox.
Yeah.
That's the millimetre wave antenna. That's operating on the high frequency band. Now, Sammy, you've got some devices up ready to go. And I'm going to try and see how this goes. Now, it is live. Look, it's something a little bit different. The camera might flicker a little bit, but we hope you can see this. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you here is we're going to show you the difference between the frequency bands and we're going to activate some 5G. So I'm just going to move this down to a spectrum analyzer and I'll explain what this is in a moment. So on the screen, we're looking at a device that can measure radio frequencies. Now, at the bottom, this is the low band, and this is the 3G and 4G band down at the 700 megahertz end. And that's for capacity. That's for extended range. In the middle, we've got the mid-band 4G, there's Wi-Fi, and right at the top end here is the current 5G network that we're using. But if I run a speed test on this device, and I'll just show you the device here, we're going to run a speed test, and when it gets going, yep, we're rocketing up to about 1 gigabit per second. You should see some activity occurring. That's the green lines going up and down on the screen. That's actually showing you that 5G is operating in the mid band. Now that just gives you an idea of the spectrum that we've currently got. But what's going to revolutionize this is we're going to do a high band connection. Now Sammy's going to hit a speed test and we'll generate some 5G. And when that connects, now hopefully you can see here that this is the 800 megahertz of spectrum, but I'll just show you the speeds that we're getting first. And we're rocketing along, and I can't read it, it's upside down here, but it's about, I think it was just over about 3 gigabits per second, which is 3,000 megabits. And I don't know what speeds you get on your 5G connections or your connections at home, but Sammy, if you could just run the continuous connection. And now what I wanted to illustrate is this is the 800 megahertz of high band frequency. Now, when this comes into context, if we look at all of the spectrum we have to date, this is what we currently have shared amongst the operators. Now that fits into about 1.5 of these channels. So if you think about this as a single lane road and a bike lane, what we've now got is we've supercharged it and we've got 8 lanes of freeway. So we've got a high speed freeway. And that extra spectrum, sorry, I hope you could see that okay.
Yes,
That's
it could.
that's going to be what connects all of our devices going into the future, particularly for your smart cities. The final thing I'm going to show you in this lab before we hand back to Matt and do the spectrum is how this beam steering works.
Now, Mike, just giving you a heads up, it's 5 o'clock. So
okay.
Just allow time for Matt to finish up on the spectrum.
Sure. Okay, no problem at all. We just disconnect that. How long have we got? Can you just remind me?
You've got a couple more minutes on this piece.
Okay, sure, that's fine. Matt only needs about 1 minute on the spectrum. He won't take that, so it won't take that long. No, Matt's fine. I am going to disconnect my earbuds because for this demo, what we actually need to do is you need to hear the radio detector, and if you could see radio frequencies, you could see the beams, but you can't. That's the physics. So I'm just going to disconnect my ears. And this is the joys of doing it live, and make sure I go to speaker.
So this is the beam forming technology that you're illustrating now?
This will be. I'll just check that you can hear me okay, Sandy?
Yes, I can, Mike.
Okay, so I'm going to give this to Sammy, and we're just going to close this. And Matt, if you can do so I'll just explain what I'm going to do first, and then we'll actually do it. This is a radio frequency detector. Now, if I hold this up near the antenna, we'll be able to hear and see flashing lights when we see a beam going to the different devices. Now, remember before when I was saying that we can send an individual signal? Now, I'm going to walk back. You'll turn your volume up, and I'll speak loud, but you'll hear this device activate, and then Sammy will come in a little bit closer. Now, we're going to connect up to this antenna on the roof, and if you run a speed test, Matt, if you hit go on the speed test, you tell me when it's running. So I hope you can hear that, or I hope you can see that. It's a red flashing light. Now what that is that's an individual beam coming to this device. Now Sammy, if you come in a bit closer and Matt does it again, I'm going to run the speed test, then we'll check the other device. Okay. If you run it, Matt.
We could see and hear that, Mike.
Oh, great, fantastic. So we're just going to do one more, and then I'll check the other device. Tell me when it's running. Okay, so that's a very narrow beam. If you see me move this, that's illustrating the width of that narrow beam. Now Sammy has a device running on the desk, and I'm going to look for that.
Oh, I see.
Right, so we're now looking at the device running on the desk, and the final thing before Matt talks, that's stopped. So basically what I hope you could see there is, if you just come in, we're just going to finish up on this. These were the individual beams going in the illustration and the graphic here. What we've tried to show you in the lab is that working in real practice. So when we go out to Southport or your precincts of the future, this is how we're going to connect those thousands of devices on 5G. So I hope that brings it to life for you and shows you how those connections are going to work. And I'll grab this while we hand back to Matt, who's going to finish up on Spectrum.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was a great illustration. And we'll hand to Matt, and then we'll have the opportunity to answer a couple of the questions in the chat before we go to our next speaker. So, Matt.
Hey, Sandy. Can you hear me, Sandy?
Yes, coming through loud and clear, Matt.
We're back. Great, excellent. Look, Sandy, just for the final minute, I know we're pressing for time, but Mike's explained the mechanics of Spectrum. I just wanted to very briefly explain how Spectrum is allocated in very simple terms, the low band, the mid band, and the high band spectrum here in Australia. Now, I like to think of Spectrum as a cake. You've got the different layers of the cake. You've got your low band over here, the 5G low band spectrum, the incumbent carriers being Optus, Telstra, and TPG Telecom, Vodafone, they all have the low band spectrum at the moment. We've got the mid band spectrum with Optus, Telstra, and TPG Telecom. But what's really exciting, and the high band is really like the icing on the cake. The high band, which was auctioned on the 23rd of April 2021, that has now been released. And again, we've had the 3 mobile carriers now have access to that spectrum for the next 15 years. Spectrum is a finite resource. The carriers have invested many hundreds of millions of dollars in that spectrum. So they're very keen to start to use that. There was a couple of other smaller operators, Pentanet in Perth and Margaret River, and also Densair, which is a neutral host. They've also been successful with that spectrum as well. So look, I hope that that gives you an understanding of 5G, the way it works, its applications, and also how spectrum works. We'll leave the summary slide up, and Sandy, we would really welcome any questions.
Yes, Matt, we will just, we've got time for a couple, and I will note that neutral host, let's mark that. I think we need an explanation of that in a later session. I think perhaps Matt Schultz might speak to that. But I'm just going to call to Janine Kreitzson. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. Janine, are you in a situation to be able to ask your question, or would you like me to do that on your behalf? Well, I might ask that on Janine's behalf, but she said that she recently attended the 6G symposium from Finland and the European planning was impressive. Are we developing in parallel? Obviously, 6G is the evolution. Would either you or Matt like to answer that one?
Yeah, it's Mike here. I'm happy to do that, Sandy, if you like. So, look, someone's not muted. I'll just step out of the way. 6G, every G or every generation of mobile technology is usually the standards are set for that 10 years in advance. So of course now we're about 10 years out from 6G. The international associations that set the standards are just starting to set the framework for what they want. There are a number of conferences and they've been running for a couple of years, and there's probably a few people that, like you said, that have attended, and we've been involved in those as well in Australia for the Australian representation. And really what they're looking at is, you know, still additional frequencies for 6G, the cloud and the computing getting very, very fast. And they're really at the stage now where they're just trying to set the expectations and what would 6G want to do. But from our perspective, we want to make sure that we can get the most out of 5G, revolutionise the connections, grow those smart cities, and then we'll be in about 3 or 4 years be in a real position to say, actually, these are the improvements that we need to see going forward. So, yeah, we are involved, definitely involved, but it's a great question.
I think from my perspective, I'm thinking the big jump, though, is from where we are now to the densification of the 5G network. I think
what we need for if you think about all, you know, there's estimates of, you know, by 2025, you know, 25 billion to 50 billion devices globally. Now they'll all be connected over a wireless network. So anything that's coming out today usually has a wireless SIM or a wireless connection in it. The 5G networks with the extra spectrum we just showed you, they're going to certainly play a key role in connecting those devices. And then if you think of, if you call it densification, we call it network growth and capacity building and so forth in the right way. 6G is really going to be taking that next layer. So, you know, you'll have instant response times, you'll have picocells. I mean, most things that you have today that are being connected, it'll be almost everything in our daily lives will be connected when we get to 6G. But it won't really be until in 2025 that we can really look at what 5G is going to deliver and what we need to do for 6G. So we're really in that very early research and planning phase. But unless you start now, you really haven't got a foundation to build on. So that's really where we're at.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I'm just going to ask another question from Janine to Matt Evans. This is building on your comments that around rural communities. The question is, what do you think of the Skylink service? I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that service, Matt, and will it bring low latency service to rural communities?
Look, thanks for the question. And look, I'm a little familiar with the Skylink service. But I think our focus at AMPTA is very much on the mobility. I think what Skylink and other services like that illustrate is that there really is going to be a good mix of different types of technologies that will suit different types of environments. Certainly in regional centres, 5G will be utilised extensively, and as you get out into the farms, that lower band spectrum will also be utilised for things like smart ag tech. But certainly there will be room for other services as well.
Thank you, Matt. And just a question from Marina. Obviously, there has been some health concerns expressed around 5G regarding the technology. And the question is around, how does that impact the placement of boxes? Oh, our shoebox or our kitchen cupboard. So would either of you like to speak to that?
Look, thanks for the question. I'll hand to Mike. Mike does a lot for AMPTA in the EME space, chairs several of our EME committees. So, Mike, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a couple of really key things here. First of all, the standards and the health standards that we have to work to, they've just been updated in the past year. In fact, there was a new Australian health standard issued this year that is suitable for 5G, for the frequencies we have now and the frequencies going forward. One of the key things that we have to test as an operator is where those boxes, like the shoe boxes and the small cells and the antennas, can go. If you remember, I said that 5G is more efficient and it uses less power because it's got a greater efficiency. The exclusion zone around the antennas, it really helps with the placement because they run at lower power. You don't need to have a very large exclusion zone around the antenna. If you're up on a mobile tower, there's a small exclusion zone for our workers at the very top. But what we design with the small cells is basically they can be integrated into the existing infrastructure, and you really only have to be, 10 centimeters away from the small cell. So, and that's more from an operational perspective. So they run at low power, they meet all the health and safety standards, and there may be some people on the call that are interested in, when the standards were set and what the health agencies say. We'll post this in the chat, but eme.gov.au, there's a website set up by the Australian government that has a lot of great information, particularly from the health authorities on 5G and safety. But you can rest assured that we make sure that we have to test all of the equipment, being devices and networks, to the latest standards. And that's one of our key roles. And that's why we're in here early, developing all of those tests and doing all of that test before it goes to market. So great question, but eme.gov.au is a great resource from the Australian government, independently of us.
Thank you very much, Mike. And those resources, we will put those in the chat as we move through so that delegates can pick that up. Mike and Matt, if I was there in person, I would give you a round of applause. That was sensational and seamless. So thank you very much for that. And also, can you just pan to Sammy?
Yeah, look, so Sammy's one of our young professionals, and look, round of applause for Sammy. He's sort of driving all of the tech behind us, and we just have the pleasure of speaking. But hey, we're gonna give you a little surprise just at the end of Matt Schultz's presentation. So we'll go on mute, and we'll be back. We'll be back very shortly, live on 5G.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Matt and Sammy. From Southport out. So now, just changing it up a little bit, we are going to ask Matt Schultz to speak to the delegates, and Matt's really going to sort of talk to us more around smart cities and how 5G is deployed in that environment and some of the opportunities and challenges. So, Matt, I think you are all set. So I will hand to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and good evening to everyone on the call. And obviously, you won't see me jumping around in exotic places like Southport, so I apologise for that. This will be a little bit drier than what we just saw with my other two colleagues. But what I'm focused on in this section of the masterclass is definitely deployment of 5G opportunities and challenges, and how they can fit into the smart city environment. So what we've got with the opportunity of 5G in the smart city, or in what we would call the future city, or the cities that we're all trying to create, made up of places and precincts. We've got inherent characteristics which Mike and Matt touched on, of 5G, which are going to make things potentially really, really interesting and really helpful for a range of use cases moving forward. You can see that there's a couple of acronyms that are on the screen in front of you. EMBB, URLLC, and MMTC. So I'll just quickly talk about what that means and how it's touched on. So the characteristics of 5G are really, really interesting, because it's not just about more bandwidth and higher speeds, but the step change that 5G can provide, or will provide, is definitely a big upgrade from 4G as we see it at the moment. So EMBB is the enhanced mobile broadband capacity. So the speed uplift, and especially over the mid and high band spectrum, is where we'll see that speed uplift coming. What will drive predominantly the speed uplift is the small cell deployment of 5G, using that high band spectrum that's Matt Evans before just mentioned has just been auctioned off by the Australian government. So that's the 26 gigahertz spectrum. That spectrum that's never been used before by any of the previous mobile networks. So it's never been used before with 4G or 3G. And because of its inherent capabilities and capacities, that's what we're going to see, that big step change in the terms of speed. But there's two other characteristics which actually set 5G down a new path compared to 4G and 3G previously. So URLLC is ultra reliable, low latency. That's that speed of connection, that time it takes to ping and connect from one part of the source part of where you are to where you need to be on the internet, or where you're trying to connect to. We're going to see that really, really come down to really low levels of milliseconds. If you do ping tests now on 4G, you can see that latency anywhere from 50, 100, 200, 300, 400 milliseconds. We're really going to see that come down, and that's important when you're looking at real-time data processing, things like connected cars, in the future, autonomous cars, stuff that needs that really low latency, real accuracy of connectivity. That's a big step change there. And the third one is the MMTC. It basically means massive multiple connections at once, so IoT. So at the moment in Australia, we don't have IoT sensors deployed at scale anywhere really in Australia at the moment, but that will inevitably change. Over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we will see a lot of pieces of urban infrastructure, as one example, connected with sensors. Those sensors will be bi-directional in its type of connectivity, and it will be always on and always connected. This is going to be the source of the real-time data that we need to drive the benefits of smart cities, and the MMTC function of 5G is going to really help that. Now, 5G in itself is going to be a really big improvement. I'm certainly not advocating that 5G is going to be the only type of connectivity needed for smart city. There will always be types of use cases that need fibre, optic feeds, other types of sensor networks like LoRaWAN and the like. But we can see that through this advancement that 5G is going to be really important moving forward. So we've got 3 telecommunications carriers who roll out the 3G, 4G, and now the 5G networks, and that is Telstra, Optus, and TPG Telecom, which was formerly Vodafone, or it's the merged entity of Vodafone and TPG. So they're the 3 carriers. They're the 3 mobile network operators. There are a whole bunch of mobile virtual network operators who obtain wholesale access to the Telstra, Optus, and or TPG networks, and then sell their services over the top. And that's a Mason and Virgin and a whole bunch of others. But in terms of actually deploying the infrastructure, who's it going to be? It's going to be, at this stage, those 3 companies. There may be others who come into this play in the coming years, but at this stage, that's the makeup of the network in Australia. And further to what Mike said in the previous section, the 5G networks will and do currently work alongside the existing 4G networks. That will continue. The core of those networks are converged at the moment, and what Mike was explaining earlier is that the core parts of those networks will be separated. We will now have standalone 5G at its core. So, but 4G will still remain and will remain for quite a number of years into the future. So this graph is just an indicative, and actually the data is slightly out of date, but it just gives you an idea of the rollout of 5G has only just begun, and what we see as 5G and what's advertised in the lead up to the recent spectrum auctions of the high band spectrum 26 gigahertz, that's basically the early iteration of 5G across the low and mid band spectrums. And in fact, it's really predominantly existing tower sites of 4G that have been upgraded, or 5G infrastructure antennas and the like has been installed on those tower sites. So that's the 5G that we've got currently now. But what's coming is an extensive rollout of 5G small cells. So these are those little boxes that you saw in the previous part of the masterclass. We will start to see them being rolled out and attached to different parts of street level infrastructure that we've never seen mobile networks used before in terms of its installation. And we will see that progressively start in this next short period of time, this next 6 to 12 month period, now that the spectrum's been acquired by the 3 mobile network operators. But then you will start to see that progressively rolled out over the coming 3 to 5 and maybe beyond years ahead of us. So just to, I suppose, explain that hopefully with a graphic, the macro cell or the tower is what we've had in the past. It's what has driven 3G and 4G. Yes, there has been small cells for 4G, but not extensively utilised. Maybe just utilised to fill in a couple of black spot or low capacity areas in places like CBDs and things like that. But we haven't seen a large rollout of small cells. Well, now that we will start to see that, and the small cells are those little boxes. They'll be installed on street furniture and other things, which I'll talk about shortly, and it augments the macro cell. Okay, so it adds to the macro cell. It brings into play that high band spectrum, the 26 gigahertz, which has really, really high capacity, but has really, really low propagation characteristics, i.e., a small cell range may only be fit for purpose for, you know, a couple of 100 metres at best. And that'll depend on the circumstances, the surrounding infrastructure and a whole range of other factors. But the small cell element is what I suppose the deployment opportunity challenge, you know, new thing that we haven't seen before, I suppose, to put it in layman's terms. So where will those small cells go? Well, those small cells will also go on buildings owned by a whole range of private owners and councils and state governments. So we'll see small cells installed on sides of buildings, like we saw, you know, around that Southport precinct. There would be evidence of that up there. But we'll also see the telcos wanting to understand if they could potentially install small cells on other types of street level infrastructure, including street light poles, traffic signal poles, park light poles, poles that host CCTV cameras, bus shelters will be of interest. You know, bins may be of interest. We'll see if that materialises or not, but definitely pole type infrastructure that's deployed down most urban streets may be of interest. Okay, so one word I suppose of clarification is that the telcos will not be needing to install a small cell on every single pole, street light pole or traffic light pole in every urban street in urban Australia. That's not going to happen. The telcos will be carrying out radio frequency planning, and they will look at sites that fit within their RF planning, and that may you know, interact with you know, one or two in a particular area, one or two potential sites or poles, as an example. So, you know, we will see it coming through, but we don't expect to see it on every single pole that, you know, in urban Australia. So that's, you know, not going to happen. And when they are looking at, you know, the types of poles and with small cells, and, you know, when they do need to co-locate or install two small cells closer together, either by one particular operator having to do that or potentially multiple operators having to install their own small cells, they will use a range of techniques that are quite common. So they'll be looking at next pole over to avoid clutter. They may potentially use one pole with multiple small cells, or even better, using swapping out those poles with smart poles where you can hide or shroud some of that infrastructure to make it a little bit more palatable from a visual amenity viewpoint to the local residents and local constituents. And then you've also got virtual co-location. So Sandy earlier talked about this neutral host opportunity. That's sort of like a virtual co-location. So the concept of having a single radio access network where it can have the characteristics and the capability to host all of the telcos, you know, so one small cell with multiple telco services on that one piece of infrastructure. Look, that's emerging. It's not something that's you know, that's envisaged right now, but it's definitely emerging internationally, and the three MNOs in Australia are certainly looking at what that might mean for them. But at this stage, in this early deployment, at least, they'll be looking at rolling out their own individual small cells. So, of course, with that amount of infrastructure and new infrastructure, we want to obviously work together collectively, and that's government, both local, state and federal, with industry, with the carriers and the mobile network operators, with the industry groups like AMTA, to try and look at deployment opportunities where it makes sense. That's a win-win. To look at potential, standards in the future where we can, move away from clutter. There is in some areas, and I certainly don't want to be alarmist by this slide, but there are areas in Australia where there are higher potential for clutter than other areas, of course. But we want to, as we move forward, all work together to have the appropriate visual amenity concealment types of opportunities where it makes sense, and where it's not just a commercial fit, which is important, but also satisfies public and community expectations around this type of rollout moving forward. So I have been doing a lot of work with a range of state and local governments around Australia around how do we prepare for 5G from an enablement viewpoint and hosting of 5G equipment on assets, and these are the typical sort of key objectives that sort of make sense that most people would agree to. We all want to facilitate the deployment of 5G to promote development and growth of all of our cities and regions. We understand we need it to be modern. We need it to be deliver the capability that we require for our businesses, our residents, our tourists, and make our places well connected to promote livability and the like. But of course, where possible, we'd all like to have some level of control about where, when and how 5G equipment is deployed. Most councils would wish to avoid multiple carriers deploying antenna on structures in an inconsistent manner. So that's the key there. It's not so much avoiding multiple carriers deploying antenna on structures, it's where it's done in a manner where it's inconsistent and leads to poor visual amenity or aesthetic outcomes. Any use of assets owned by any government or even private sector entity or utility, you would want some sort of reasonable terms on that in terms of the hosting and utilisation of those assets, and that's something that the telcos, and MNOs certainly understand and are happy to move forward with, especially in a reasonable manner. But achieving consistent and efficient deployment outcomes and addressing any risks associated with the deployment of 5G equipment. So addressing concerns, be they real or not, around electromagnetic emissions or EME is something that we all collectively need to work together to manage effectively for our community. But these are the things that we just need consistent and ongoing levels of collaboration to get this right over the coming number of years. So just as we're moving through, I know that the main audience on today's call is probably state government and local government representatives. I have been working with a range of stakeholders to start looking at what are some of the potential hosting opportunities, and not just for 5G. So assets like streetlight poles and other types of street level infrastructure. Unfortunately, in the Australian context, we have a fragmentation of ownership. We have a bunch of different owners, and they can be different in different areas. So we have electricity utilities owning a whole bunch of infrastructure. We have some councils owning certain amounts of infrastructure in certain areas, and neighbouring councils don't. So unfortunately, we do have to deal with a little bit of inconsistency there. But some of the clients and local and state authorities I've been working with are looking at what are some of the potential hosting opportunities. Some of these may or may not eventuate, but things like the 5G small cells, IoT sensors and gateways, EV charging, in the sort of longer term future, some type of really micro edge compute type of capability facility. And of course, you know, the opportunity to encapsulate all of that into a what's called a smart pole, to have all that sort of hidden, but have that multiple capability is things that people are definitely looking at. So look, thank you. I've reached the end of my section of this presentation, so I might just hand back to you now, Sandy, to carry the session forward.
Yeah, Matt, that was a tremendous presentation, and it really complemented well what Mike and Matt have already spoken to. Now, before I go to this Menti poll and some questions, Mike has just set up to illustrate something else. Are you over at Pacific Fair, Australia Fair?
Yes. Good afternoon again.
Sorry, Mike. I was supposed to throw to you, mate. So
no, that's fine. It was. Look, the presentations really complemented each other really well, because we were showing some of the, some of the 5G stuff in action, and you were just talking about deployments and small cells. We're in Australia Fair, which is a commercial shopping centre, and they're just closing up, but we've just jumped into the Telstra shop before they leave. I wanted to show you, first of all, I'm going to look at the ceiling. I don't know whether you can spot the 5G antenna, but there's a little round dot that looks like a smoke detector. I don't know if you can see it on the roof.
Yes,
you can see that. There's that's a 5G. That's basically a 5G small cell. So when you're talking about assets that can blend into infrastructure, so inside shopping centres, inside buildings, that all that has is a Cat6 cable, or it has a Cat5, Cat6 cable that plugs into the back of it. The radio and antenna are all built into it. So I thought that would complement what you were showing, Matt, because when you're in a shopping mall or when you're in a commercial precinct in a store like this, that's going to blend into the roof really well. So just to sort of give some context to some of the stuff you showed. But we'll sign off from here and walk back up to the Innovation Centre and help answer questions at the end. But I just thought we'd show you that while we were still live. Yep.
Thank you so much, Mike. We'll see you at the panel at the end. So I might just, Mark, if you want to open the Menti meeting, the Menti survey, and if we go to Menti 3, just building on what Matt Schultz was speaking about, it was really a call to action for a range of stakeholders to think about what their role is in 5G deployment. And I'd be really interested if the audience would like to indicate, what do you think is the most important role of place owners in 5G deployment? Is it to promote the deployment and encouraging it so we have smart precincts? Is it to represent community needs? Is it to influence the streetscape and encourage telcos to work towards concealing the small cell infrastructure? Is it asset management? Is it economic return? Or is it addressing some of the cyber risks? So we'll just open that for a little while. If there's no responses, that's fine. We will move. Okay, interesting. So Matt Schultz, your presentation hit the mark there. So happy for the panel members to comment on what they're seeing here. So it's changing as people put in their responses. So it's not surprising that a place owner, obviously largely being local councils who are there as the level of government that needs to represent the community, that they would be strong advocates. And concealing infrastructure is one way of doing that. Interesting, Matt. You can see asset management is number 2. Any comments on that from your perspective? You must be happy to see that.
Look, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really important, especially for the audience in today's call, for sure. We need to enable this outcome, but it needs to be done in a way that has the most optimal outcomes for all parties involved, including the hosting asset owners as well. So, yeah, look, it's a work in progress. There is work underway, but you know, we do need to do more over the next 12, 24 months for sure to really optimise this and get this right, so that we can just have it happening quite nicely around the rest of Australia over the next 5 to 7 years.
And I think, Matt, that's why this masterclass is so important at this time. So it's just around building understanding, knowledge and awareness so we can take on those roles. Tim Wilson, Tim, let me know if you're willing to ask the question yourself, or I can ask it for you.
Hey, Sandy, thanks. So this was a question about the emphasis of small cells and the impact on overall network rollout cost. Basically, because there are so many cells or base stations to be built because of the low propagation, I guess, of some of these high band frequencies. Does that push up the cost of network rollout, and does that have a knock-on effect on the cost of 5G connectivity?
So it definitely has a knock-on effect in terms of the cost of network rollout, but unfortunately the market won't allow the MNOs, the mobile network operators, to charge heaps and heaps and heaps more for the connection costs or the plans, I suppose, that we've all got for 5G. So it's a bit of a tougher situation for the mobile network operators, because yes, this is going to cost a lot of money, and they're not going to be able to necessarily recoup that in terms of extra revenue from users. So that's plain and simple. That people want more for the same or less, and as consumers, and that's actually probably not going to change.
Matt, and I can see, thank you, Matt, for that answer and your question, Tim. And I can see Matt Evans is going to add some more information to that.
Yeah, look, thanks, Sandy and Tim, for the question. I think Tim makes a really good point in that there will be a tremendous number of small cells deployed to ensure that the network is operating well and efficiently. And when it comes to things like access agreements to infrastructure and utilisation of Crown land and public land, that is something that we're acutely aware of in terms of the impact on costs of deploying the network. So when it comes to things like master agreements with agencies and authorities and councils and other landowners, it can have a real impact on the ability to deploy what will be a very large number of small cells.
Thank you, Matt. I think we'll close the poll. And Tim, thank you very much for your question. I'll try and work through the questions in the chat as we go. But we're going to move on to, so we've started with 5G demonstration. We understand what it is. Matt Schultz has eloquently spoken about the application of that in a city context. Now we're going to go to Troy Daly, who's going to that next level, which is talking about precinct scale and what the opportunities that 5G present. So welcome, Troy. I'll hand to you.
Hey, thanks, Sandy. Appreciate it. And look, I know I wanted to start by saying how dirty am I as a sort of a dyed-in New South Wales person to be hearing about best practice up in Southport in Queensland. This is just killing me. So anyway, there you go. It's great. So look, I'll just start a bit of a different tact before we get into 5G smart cities, just to give people a quick backdrop on Sydney and the way the Commission thinks about Sydney, and particularly some of the big precincts. So Sydney now is thought of, the blue fuzz is the eastern city. It used to be the hub of the whole place and everything fed into it. About 5 years ago, 3 cities were born as a concept. So strong employment outcomes desirable in each of those cities. And then bringing it back to today's discussion really quickly, in each of these 3 cities, we have, call them big prototype areas effectively for today's conversation. There's the one that probably gains the most attention and deservedly so, I'd say, which is the Bradfield Aerotropolis area. Effectively a greenfield site and a chance to build a city with everything in it that, you know, is a next 100-year city rather than a retrofitted last 100-year city. But we also have in the middle very large precinct in Greater Parramatta we call the Westmead Health and Innovation District. It has massive clinical service assets for health, also has massive research facilities, also has massive capacity to grow as well. Everyone's probably thinking e-health solutions and digital health at this point, what 5G does, and deservedly so. Then in the east, we have Tech Central, which is Tech Central is everything digital. It's everything software, but it has a lot of specializations around cyber, quantum, AI, has its own medtech area, creative digital pursuits, fintech, regtech. It has everything in there as well. So we like to talk about innovation ecosystems in these places and jobs, and that's probably what I'll focus on a bit in 5G's opportunities there. Surely for everyone then 5G is probably, you know, it's the web that holds a lot of this together. The ability for 5G networks to be tailored, to be sliced. We've talked a lot about the low latency. All of these things means it's got to be a backbone in each of these precincts for us. So in each of these places, Bradfield, Westmead and Tech Central, we want to be leading, if not bleeding edge. The ultra reliable piece that Matt Schultz is talking about is absolutely critical for some of the quite important enterprise activities that we'll be having going on here, be it advanced manufacture or health. And then, of course, from an internet of things perspective as well, each of these precincts will be, you know, have a massive number of devices, probably Tech Central device density. I was talking about with Mike, but I think it'll be right up there. So look, moving on to the place, and there's 2 levels of opportunity here from our point of view. The one we all know and love, you know, they're clearly improved in opportunities for consumers in digital services. So, you know, your obvious go-to, I guess, is audio visual capacity and things that will improve. And from an enterprise point of view, productivity is there through just, you know, better reliability, better speed, better latency on existing service platforms. But from our point of view, it's where you go with this in terms of the ability to develop new businesses, new products, solve new problems. If we sit at a consumer level, what we want from Bradfield, Westmead and Tech Central, and we sit in the consumer or the resident space, the e-health capacity is amazing. Smarter services for individuals is clearly amazing. But I guess I'd probably also emphasise the social benefit piece that sits there and the environmental benefit piece that can sit there as well. Environment, obviously, from just simple things like better transport services, social benefits coming from better safety, better e-health outcomes as well. It might interest people to know that in Westmead, for example, and probably Bradfield, it's a very socially diverse group, both in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of socio-economic as well. And mobile devices from an e-health and a virtual health point of view, the most efficient e-health products will actually be on the mobile phone network. They won't be on the desktop network as you see advertised sometimes. So 5G, they're critical locally. We expect a lot of startups and enterprises to come off that business to consumer opportunity from 5G. Pretty much ditto for enterprise as well. So from an enterprise point of view, the low latency and I think what Matt Schultz was saying in terms of that ultra reliable piece, the productivity tools and everything that comes from that is something that we'll want to encourage. Which leads me on to what we've discussed a lot here today, which is the neutral host model is interesting. In our precincts, we have a lot of motivated counterparties at play. We're organising councils, the state government agencies, so think of health, transport and others. Tech Central, actually in each of the precincts, we've got universities who are extremely motivated as well to make this happen. We have a lot of like-minded people who control the assets, and I guess I'd go back. We'd love to find this way to have shared infrastructure, be it a separate ownership of infrastructure through a neutral host model, or be it something as simple as government going out to the telcos and saying, guys, we want you guys to propose a shared model back for us to allow things to happen here as well. I think that's win-win-win on every situation. It's lower infrastructure costs overall. It allows us to design an optimal system, probably from an EME point of view, potentially too. And then there's the aesthetics of it, and just lower overall impact for everyone, I would hope. One of the key things we're seeing in each of these precincts too, just to finish on really quickly, and again, it goes to high reliability, low latency, is that for each of them, there's a very strong tendency here to have open source labs. So the labs, the one I've put up is actually, it's from South Korea. You see it's got a multifunction robot there, but we're seeing a big demand for shared lab facilities that people can access. So imagine you've got a lab process where you've got a 10-step process running remotely. So you're driving the lab from your remote location. You're doing it throughout the day. You need instantaneous response, probably from the cloud back to the lab, back to your device. If you miss your step in the process, then you've pretty much buggered your access time to the lab, and you don't want that. From a biotech point of view, you can imagine how that would mess your day up. So certainly what we're probably seeing is in each of these districts, we're probably seeing at least half a dozen remote shared lab facilities going in different specializations, all of which will be run by 5G. So for us, it's a real case in point to say we need to get this going. Yeah, that's probably about it for me, Sandy. I'll leave it there.
Troy, that's sensational. You've whetted our appetite around the future of Westmead, Tech Central, Bradfield City Centre in terms of what's possible with 5G-enabled precinct and city. I'm going to ask Mark to just open a Menti poll, which is sort of building on that topic around economic growth and jobs that can come from 5G. So this is just a free text. So if you have logged into Menti, we're just keen to know, how do you see that 5G enabled places grows jobs? What is it doing? And I'm keen for any of the panel members to throw in their thoughts here as well. So we're seeing a couple of responses here. Great opportunities for small businesses and startups to provide innovative new services, particularly if you've got open data available for them to innovate with as well.
I think Sandy, the data one's an interesting one. I know there's been a couple of questions on data here, and it's interesting for me working across health precincts where people don't like sharing their health data. I don't know why that is. I share mine personally, but a lot of people, fair enough, don't want that. But de-anonymizing data and working towards that is another key to unlock all sorts of opportunities. So I don't know. Yeah, if we could partner that with Smart City, we'd find gold, I think.
And also we've got lots of lessons from the Western Parkland City and obviously the Western Sydney City deal, which was looking at 5G and opportunities. So hopefully that will extend across other precincts here in New South Wales. But here we've got some other It'll encourage higher income jobs and an innovation economy, which is what we are looking to transition to. It might not actually grow job numbers, which is a caveat. Farming, teaching, actually precision farming, different types of jobs in farming, innovation zones and data science jobs. So some interesting comments there. Remote learning has happened in COVID, and I think it actually takes the education to a new level. Perhaps complex universities degrees can be done from your regional town as opposed to having to locate to a city. So we're going to move. Thank you for everyone who contributed to that Menti. We'll close that poll now, and we're going to move on to our last section of the presentation, which we're going to bring back Matt Evans and Matt Schultz. And obviously, when we look at 5G, it's a complex area. It's being rolled out in cities, in communities, in regional areas, and in precincts. And what that relies upon, if we want to, ensure that we get the best outcome for our urban landscapes, whether that be concealed smart poles or community safety and community confidence, it really relies upon having our stakeholders ready from a policy perspective. So Matt Evans, I think you're going to lead this presentation to talk about some of the considerations, and Matt Schultz is going to chime in where he needs to. So I'll hand back to you, Matt Evans.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And both Matt and I are in the driver's seat here. Matt's going to be driving the slides, and he also is going to be covering one of the particular topics in here. So very much a team effort here. I think, Sandy, one thing I really wanted to get out of this particular session over the next 5 or 10 minutes is just starting to suggest and crystallise some of the recommendations that we might end up taking forward to the Smart Summit. I think it's on the 22nd of June. So certainly we've heard a lot today about how industry and government should be working together on creating opportunities for the deployment of 5G, and that's really going to be what the focus is of this presentation. So Matt Schultz, if you could flick to the next slide, please. Thanks very much. We've heard about 5G networks emerging as a future enabler of solutions in the smart places ecosystem, and it's being increasingly acknowledged. So whether it's the Standards Australia roadmap for smart cities, or whether it's local council smart city strategies like the example we have there of the city of Greater Geelong, 5G is certainly being acknowledged as something that will be critical in terms of infrastructure and the ecosystem itself. So it's critical for two particular reasons. And firstly, we've heard a lot today about the use cases, but it's also critical in terms of how we are going to incorporate this infrastructure into the environment and the processes we're going to use for that. Now, we do need a more contemporary and balanced policy response, followed by development controls that do support 5G, yet they do need to be better controls because they do need to provide incentives for better visual outcomes and also for better siting and design solutions. So we think that is certainly one of the solutions that should be looked at. I think with government and industry working together can we achieve that. I don't think it can be done in isolation. I think that what we do, whilst 5G use cases are certainly important, we can't put the cart before the horse, the cart being the infrastructure. For us to be able to fully take advantage of 5G, we really do need to make sure that we do have the ability to reliably deploy the standalone 5G networks to provide that sort of ubiquitous access that we need. So I think that as as we go about continuing to deploy 4G, because I think we need to acknowledge that we're continuing as an industry to augment that, we also need to keep our eye on how we deploy the thousands of new 5G facilities across our suburbs and cities, and how we work together for that. Now, to that end, what we've been doing at AMPTA is we've developed and recently launched what we refer to as our state and territory 5G infrastructure readiness assessment. The readiness assessment is a document that's available on the AMPTA website. If you just go to the AMPTA website, it's in the What's New section, and what it does is it promotes collaboration, and it looks at best practice, and it looks at leading practice in the planning system, and it promotes best practice examples from each state and territory. It then suggests reform opportunities specifically relating to the planning system and land tenure, and it comes up with what we think are very balanced and measured specific recommendations. There's 21 of those recommendations, and I want to emphasise, I think what's really important about this document is that each of those 21 recommendations are proposing solutions that have been achieved somewhere else in Australia. So a good example of that, we want to see more specified performance criteria in the planning system. Now, that's been achieved in New South Wales. The Department of Planning there, around a decade ago now, produced the infrastructure SEP with some very specific performance criteria that allowed some developments to be permit exempt or complying development, yet also achieved a better outcome. So it was a win-win situation. We were talking about some win-win situations before. Now, the principles behind this also include the need to make sure that we can get access to land on reasonable terms and consistent with what other utilities are being charged, because we're very mindful that there may be landowners that see this as a commercial opportunity, but as to the point we made before, we're very acutely aware of the impact that charging for the use of land can have on the ability to deploy the network. Finally, things like certainty of DA processes, timeframes, fees, the application of science-based policies relating to EME are all really critical, and these all feature in that readiness assessment document. I'm going to hand over to Matt Schultz now. Matt, I think you were going to cover off on the next slide, which is an example of what we were just talking about.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, thanks, Matt. So look, just to give some commentary around this particular slide, we've got pretty much three types of approval process, I suppose, is for all telecommunications infrastructure that comes through, on council and state government agencies and a whole, number of different authorities. So let's talk about number one first of all. So low impact facilities, right? So the low impact facilities are telecommunications facilities that are exempt from any type of council approval if they fulfil that particular requirement under the Telecommunications Act and the sub part of that, which is the low impact facilities determination, the latest one being in 2018. So, for example, if you're putting in fibre optic cable in duct, that's low impact facility. If you're putting a really small antenna on a particular structure, that's likely to be low impact. What's not likely, what is not low impact is, for example, a 30-metre tower that hosts a whole range of telecommunications antenna and equipment. So that is not deemed low impact. So that would then move into either section number 2 or 3. So we'll talk about section number 2 now, which is basically there are permit exempt or complying. So there is typically what in some cases you might call this code accessible. If there's a certain planning code or SEP provisions in the case of New South Wales and it fulfills that criteria, then there's no requirement for the DA to be triggered, the development application and approval to be triggered. It can be deemed permit exempt and complying, but you still need to notify and consult pursuant to what Matt's got in this slide, which is the Mobile Phone Base Station Deployment Code, which is developed by the Communications Alliance, and the same with low impact facilities as well. All of these do trigger, all the part 1 and part 2 do trigger notification consultation in regards to that code. But then we move into to part 3, which is where you need a DA. So if it doesn't fit within that that code, or it's it doesn't fit within those deemed limits or rules, then you do need to go through a DA process, which would be pursuant to the local council. Okay, the local council that this is being installed into. So each council has their own planning schemes, and look, generally similar. There might be slightly different bits and pieces, like Matt talked about, in terms of DA approval timeframes and fees and things like that, which certainly is there to be looked at in terms of making more efficient and optimal. But the DA is then triggered. The notification consultation needs to go through what's stated in the planning scheme or the state and territory planning legislation in terms of consultation notification, and it would typically then go to a council meeting, and the councillors would vote on that and for approval or not. So there's DAs that go through that mechanism that do not get approved, and that's the process in place. So just to be clear, that is how things are approved, and various legislation. The Telecommunications Act, I will note, is federal government legislation, Australian government legislation, which does have a higher head of power than all states and council-based legislation, regulation, and rules. So that's the hierarchy of it. But obviously, the work that AMTA has done has looked at some opportunities to improve parts number 2 and 3. I also will note, before I finish now, that the low impact facilities area that is being looked at in terms of review by the Commonwealth Government, and recently they've gone out to consultation on what that may or may not mean. But yeah, that's where we're at there, and then it moves obviously through to approval once it goes through those mechanisms, and then gets installed. But I might hand the next one to you now, Matt.
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Matt. I know we're getting near the end of the time allotted, but I just wanted to make the point, one really good example of shifting from the need for a development application through to a permit exempt process would be something like swapping out an existing pole for a slightly taller one to enable co-location. And you can do that in New South Wales and you can do it in Victoria, but there's 6 other states and territories where you can't do that. And it's just another example of where we think there could be significant upside if we did go through a reform process with the states and territories. As I said, I think there's really no better time for the Australian states and territories to review and recalibrate their policy settings and planning rules to cater for 5G. 5G is being deployed at pace at the moment, but there's still a lot more to come. And so I think now presents a really good opportunity. We've had some fabulous feedback in relation to the state and territory readiness assessment. So we've had some very positive messages from the Victorian state government in relation to the four planning reforms that we've suggested. And we really do look forward to collaborating with the state and territory governments to co-design those performance criteria, which would lead to acceptable 5G siting and design outcomes. It is a win-win. It leads to better solutions and provides more certainty for the industry to deploy 5G. And ultimately, what that means is that people will benefit as well. So look, I'll leave it there, Sandy. I want to thank Matt for driving the slides and his comments. We're hoping that some of these things can be taken to the Smart Cities Summit on the 22nd of June as well.
Thank you, Matt Evans, Matt Schultz. That was a tremendous presentation, and I think you outlined at the beginning, Matt, it's such an important time to look at that policy reform. You've outlined the opportunity, but also the goodwill that exists between industry and government to collaborate for positive outcomes, which will ultimately benefit our communities. Janine, who can't ask the question but made a comment, is smart poles seem to be the answer. So may not be the answer to everything, but certainly that asset management and understanding what infrastructure is there is important. We are going to just go to a quick Menti poll, which is just asking place owners what some of the barriers are to the policy reform that both Matt Schultz and Matt Evans spoke to. So is it lack of knowledge and awareness? And there's certainly a readiness tool that helps there. Is it complexity of planning processes? Time horizon is too far away in that people aren't engaging? Or is it a lack of commercial agreement for telco to access land? Or is it too community sensitive to make changes? So just interested, I'm sure the panel would be interested to see what results are coming through. Certainly after that last presentation, I can understand why the complexity of planning processes has popped up as one of the indicators, but lack of knowledge and awareness, which also supports the reason why we're having this masterclass, and we'll then extend that into the summit. Okay, I think we might close that Menti. Oh, no, we've got a couple more. We might close the Menti poll in a couple of seconds. Any comments on that from Matt Evans on the results that we're seeing?
Yeah, look, Sandy, I think I think that it sort of reflects what we were saying, and there's a lot of education that we need to do as an industry with state and territory governments, which is why we prepared the readiness assessment. It really was a tool to make sure that the states and territories knew what other states and territories were doing, which was best practice. Because there's something that's good in each of the state sort of planning frameworks, pretty much, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that, and it's a transfer of knowledge, basically.
Thanks, Matt. And I think we might close the poll and come back to a gallery view. So we've got about 4 questions to conclude the session with. Great job, everyone. And Troy's hopefully still there. One of the questions I'll just go back to is looking at best practice. And Peter was asking, who would you consider as being the global leader from a rollout perspective, and what, if any, lessons can be learned from their those early adopters?
Sandy, I might just make a few comments on that. If you do flick through the readiness assessment, we've provided some examples in the UK and the US of some best practice. But look, there's some really interesting stuff going on in terms of regulation of deployment all around the world in parts of Europe. Places like Scotland, and if people want to go and visit the Scotland 5G Centre, they're doing some fabulous things in relation to 5G generally, but also in the deployment space. There's, I think, the best examples are those where the local councils are actually looking at performance criteria and working with industry, and San Diego, and in fact there's 30 states in the US that have just passed legislation relating to 5G deployment, and there's some really good stuff coming out of New York as well. So I'm happy to follow up with some good examples if people are interested.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to share them in the chat. I'll pose a different question. So we did speak about obviously a lot of city development and 5G deployment in cities, and we're also acknowledging that that's market-led. Often it's where the demand goes. Obviously, installing 5G in a precinct like you described, Troy, is really important. What Rory was asking, it looks like a really important opportunity for all smart places. So the question is, what does industry and government need to ensure or to do to ensure that this is available for all, not just in select locations in city centres? Bit of a digital equity question there. So
well, I can start a response. Look, I feel that there's opportunity to think outside the box in some of what the market might deem non-commercial areas, and then there's sort of two main areas that falls into, and I know the Commonwealth government is now starting to get more of a focus on the two. So obviously we've got regional, rural, and remote, which is just difficult in terms of the tyranny of distance and the lack of density of customers out in those areas. So the opportunity for any type of shared infrastructure might stack up better in some of those circumstances. And when I say shared, it doesn't necessarily have to mean active share. It could just be passive shared. So basically, one tower structure, but a more seamless opportunity for multiple carriers to have their equipment on there, sharing backhaul, or the transmission link might be more of an opportunity. But I think the area that's really been an issue for the growth of Australia is basically the outer extents of urban areas, the greenfield development growth. We do have a bit of an issue where the mobile networks, aren't always in place as the people come into those new areas, have brand new houses, brand new roads, brand new, even now, fibre optic infrastructure generally, but still have to jump out into the middle of the street to jump on, their mobile phone. So I think that outer extent, I think the Commonwealth government is calling it peri-urban. The peri-urban element, and of course that's where all of our new cities are being developed. Western Sydney, the city of Bradfield, is in a peri-urban environment. It's out on the fringes of the western parts of Sydney. So these are areas of focus, and of course thinking outside the box in terms of more sharing that makes sense. That not just feasible from a government viewpoint or from a place owner viewpoint, but also needs to be feasible from a commercial and a technical delivery viewpoint. But also maybe we do need to have some regulatory sandboxing, have some areas where we can try things, get some exemptions from regulation with some certain scope and boundaries, and just see what might work, and learn from what does, and also learn from what doesn't.
So I certainly.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Troy.
I was going to say, so I certainly think Bradfield at the Aerotropolis, that whole area, is a sandbox and should be considered a sandbox for this, because it's not often, if ever, in 100-year periods, you get a greenfield example like this that is going to be so extensive, where all the kit's got to go in from scratch. And look, I think Simon and Rory are online, and they're all over that, which is great. I would highlight something. It's a really interesting question from Rory, because the more people's lifestyles are improved through like immediate connectivity and services, the more this sense of equity is going to be important. And like spending a fair bit of time thinking of the e-health space at the moment through Westmead, and the haves and have-nots of strong e-health services, it's going to be pretty profound. People will live better lives because of the incredible services that can eventually be developed through e-health. And if you're not in an area, and it's as simple as, you don't get 5G connectivity, so your e-health service is poor cousin to someone who's in it, Camaray or somewhere like that close to the city, then it's not good for our society, clearly.
Actually, thank you, Troy. It leads on to a question from Simon. I'm not sure whether Simon's still on the call. If you're there, Simon, I'm happy for you to ask the question about the active neutral host deployment and shared infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I am still on the call. The question is basically, what are the risks, traps, pitfalls to avoid as place owners when thinking about some of those active neutral host deployments? And I'd originally thought that I'd direct that at Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Simon. Look, I suppose risks are, I always look at things, opportunity based or enablement based. So, if a place owner is going to be serious about supporting active neutral hosts or even passive neutral host, you want to make sure that you've got the enablement right. So have you got, the poles in place that are easy to access and affordable and have the right type of, quick approval times? Do you have the duct in place where you can quickly build, the fibre connectivity to those small cells? So all that sort of digital infrastructure, or some would call digital plumbing, if you can get that right, then you make yourself even more attractive to be worked with by the mobile network operators, to deploy any type of shared types of infrastructure. So facilities access agreements, streamlining that and getting your digital plumbing right. I think that's what place owners should be looking at to help make this achievable in the near future.
Thank you, Matt. And to your point, bringing back the digital equity piece, if we're able to encourage more sharing of infrastructure, lowering the cost, therefore, for mobile operators to deploy, it will benefit all.
Well, look, I don't quite know how we would do this as government at the moment, but it's an interesting concept that could government basically go out there and ask for a combined pitch from the major telcos for a shared infrastructure solution for a major area. And, I wouldn't like to say that the government could put them over the barrel or anything like that, of course, but, surely there's got to be some sort of scope for the government to exert influence to at least prototype an outcome there and see how it goes. The other thing I was going to, a bit of a question back to you guys, maybe you, Mike, with Telstra looking to split their infrastructure assets into an infrastructure ownership business and, a separate service model elsewhere. I would guess that the competitive advantage of Telstra's mobile network might be separated from that, or is it? Does anyone know? I haven't read what's in the public domain on what infrastructure assets Telstra are looking to separate from their service business or not.
Sure. So just checking you can still hear me, Sam and Troy. Okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
we're all good.
So really what Telstra's been looking at is splitting up the ownership of the towers, not the actual mobile network itself. So the towers and the infrastructure. There's obviously a significant asset there. And, you know, you were just talking about sharing opportunities before. Well, I think that improves that because you've got those assets available. And look, a couple of really good themes I've heard, you know, as a telco and as a mobile operator and as someone that works with the technology side, I'm not specifically on, you know, council policy decision making, but we get involved in a lot of emergency situations like responders to fire, floods and so forth, and COVID in the last 12 months. It's interesting when that happens because it suddenly puts a different dynamic for planners, governments and local governments and people that need the infrastructure, because suddenly you'll have a local council that says, okay, actually don't worry about that. We just need the service here now. Can you come and put a facility in? And you try taking it away at the end of it. You know, you can't, once you've enabled a service, it's very difficult to remove that service. What we learned through COVID was that within 2 to 3 weeks, everybody was instantly working from home. So you had an increase on the NBN, but you had a significant increase on people's use of mobile, and that's gone through the whole period. And the dependency, particularly with schools and kids and educational facilities. Now, it's suddenly when you have situations like that, that people go, how can we work better together? So you're talking about sandpits. I would really encourage in the seminar and the workshops you have going forward to look at, you know, like the impediments that Matt Evans was talking about, but, you know, what's going to benefit us as a society? What is really going to drive it home to the mum and dad and the kids in the education? Because out on the streets here on the Gold Coast, you know, in 2019, people were going, hey, I'm worried about 5G. You know, what's it going to do? In 2020 is how quickly can we have it? You know, it's really changed. So I would really encourage, you know, that mentality and that mindset about how can we solve these problems collaboratively, and what's that joint method going forward? Because that's a win-win. You know, I'm not saying policy is not important. It is, but it's the mindset you approach it with.
Mike, I think that is a perfect place to draw the conversation to a close. I think the fact that we have got all of you on the call today is evidence of great collaboration, and it's certainly something that us within the Smart Places team at New South Wales Government and broader is very much committed to. So firstly, I want to thank each of you for your commitment. It's just been a tremendous session. And the great news, it's been recorded, so it will be there in perpetuity. And Mark will post the link in the chat, but also he'll also share the link to go and access it. I'd also encourage you and all of the delegates on the call to come to our next masterclass, which is on May 26th, and it's around precincts and public spaces. And importantly, then on the 22nd of June is the Smart Places Summit, which will bring to life some of the issues that we've spoken about today, and perhaps Mike pick up that collaboration piece and move that forward. So on that, thank you very much and have a very pleasant evening.
Well done, Sandy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Great job.
You're welcome.
It's
Bye-bye.
a pleasure to be live from the Gold Coast. See you.